I am Carter, the man who inherited the CEO's chair of Horizon Corp, the real estate empire my father poured his life into building. But sitting at the top doesn't mean I hold the power of life and death. The board of directors, filled with old guard shareholders, constantly uses dividends and profit margins as a leash around my neck. My mother is particularly adept at this, always finding ways to meddle in the company's strategic decisions. Lately, they have been relentless, applying pressure in every board meeting, forcing me into a marriage with Victoria, the sole daughter of the chairman of Prosperity Holdings. Prosperity Holdings is our fiercest competitor in the industrial real estate sector. My family calls it a match made in heaven, a union that would yield enormous benefits and create a near monopoly in the market. But I know all too well the ambitions of Prosperity's chairman and his daughter. Victoria is a woman of insatiable greed and cunning, willing to use any means necessary to achieve her business goals. If she were to set foot in my family, she would blind my mother with sweet words and flattery. Sooner or later, Horizon's new industrial park project would be hollowed out from the inside and devoured by Prosperity. I would rather sacrifice short-term profits than hand over my family's legacy to an outsider. To sever this forced arrangement completely, I needed a decisive and legal solution. I decided to find a shield, a wife in name only. She had to be legally my wife on paper but have no voice, no power to cause harm, and most importantly, be completely under my control. I tasked my secretary with compiling a list of small and medium-sized enterprises in the building materials sector that were facing financial hardship but had a respectable name, a necessary facade for my mother. My sights landed on the company owned by a Mr. Thompson. Their financial statements showed a staggering $2 million bank loan, and the bank was preparing to foreclose on their entire factory. Bankruptcy was imminent. I had my assistant summon Mr. Thompson to my office. When he walked in, the usual confident demeanor of a business owner was gone, replaced by the anxious, stooping posture of a man at the end of his rope. I didn't beat around the bush. I laid out a cold, straightforward transaction. I would provide a capital injection in the form of an interest-free loan and act as a guarantor to settle their entire bad debt with the bank, saving his company from the brink. In return, he had to bring his daughter to sign a 1-year marriage contract with me. 1 year was just enough time for me to consolidate my power on the board, neutralize my mother's faction, and permanently quash the idea of an alliance with Prosperity Holdings. I chose this family because someone indebted with such a massive favor would never dare to demand any rights. They would have to obey me unconditionally. According to the initial agreement, the candidate was Mia, the younger daughter, known for her stylish, pampered lifestyle. But just 3 days before the marriage registration, my assistant reported a change from their side. They knew this was a commercial transaction, devoid of love or the true status of a wife. Unwilling to see their beloved younger daughter suffer a sham marriage for a year, Mr. Thompson and his second wife decided to push the older daughter, Evelyn, into her place. Along with the notification of the change came a hastily emailed resume. I leaned back in my leather office chair and opened the attachment. The resume was pathetically sparse. Evelyn had grown up in a remote, small town with her grandmother and had only recently moved to the city to live with her father's family. Her education section was lackluster, listing only a degree from an obscure community college in a rural state, with no notable achievements or work experience. The attached passport-style photo in the top left corner showed a girl in remarkably plain clothes, her face half obscured by thick-rimmed glasses. Her eyes seemed vacant, lacking the vitality and polish of a city dweller. After reading the information, instead of being angry at being deceived at the last minute, I let out a triumphant laugh. This change was a godsend for my plan. I had initially worried that the spoiled socialite younger daughter would cause drama in my family and disrupt my work. But now, a simple, undereducated girl from the countryside was the perfect pawn for this role. In my mind at the time, someone with Evelyn's background would be crippled by a severe inferiority complex upon entering the world of the elite. She would be obedient, submissive, and do as she was told, effortlessly manipulated. A person with little education wouldn't be smart enough to scheme for assets or form alliances with anyone in my family. Placing someone like her in my house would be like leaving a stone in a corner. It couldn't possibly cause trouble. When the contract expired, I would simply toss her a compensation check, and she would quietly pack her bags and leave. My assistant, Liam, standing by my desk, cautiously asked if I needed him to investigate her background and relationships further. I waved his suggestion away immediately. It was completely unnecessary and a waste of time. My schedule was packed with major projects. I didn't need to concern myself with a harmless pawn, a collateral for a debt, nothing more. Everything had fallen into place exactly as I wanted. Evelyn was the most perfect shield I could have asked for to deceive the media and placate the board. I told my assistant to proceed with the legal preparations for the wedding as soon as possible. The wedding of the CEO of Horizon Corp was shockingly swift and dull. There was no media presence, no extravagant motorcade of limousines. There was only a small private dinner held for the two families to perform the introductions. My mother wore an elegant velvet dress but maintained a cold demeanor, her disdain for the bride's family palpable throughout the event. She made continuous snide remarks about their financial state and didn't even bother to look at Mr. Thompson when he timidly raised his glass for a toast. I didn't bother playing the part of the attentive groom either. Immediately after the perfunctory toast, I made an excuse about a sudden video conference with international partners and left the restaurant. I tossed the car keys to my driver, coldly instructing him to take Evelyn to my family's mansion, completely abandoning my new bride to the prying, critical eyes of relatives from both sides. On our wedding night, the clock struck 2 a.m. before I set foot in the house. I had deliberately stayed late at the office, then stopped by a club for a few strong drinks with business partners. I didn't want to hide my disgust and indifference toward this debt-fueled marriage. I wanted to establish my dominance immediately, to shatter any fanciful dreams she might have. I wanted to use this cold, cruel attitude to force her to understand her insignificant position, to extinguish any thought of aspiring to the privileges of a CEO's wife. In this house, she was merely a temporary resident, a contract employee, nothing more. Pushing open the door to the guest bedroom on the second floor, I saw the desk lamp was still on. Evelyn was sitting upright on the leather sofa near the window. She wasn't wearing a seductive nightgown like some gold digger who had just married into wealth. She was still in the same plain, long-sleeved gray outfit from earlier. The thick glasses were still perched on her nose, hiding most of her facial features. The vast room was devoid of any warmth or romance befitting a wedding night. Seeing me enter, she stood up, her hands hanging loosely at her sides, maintaining a safe distance as she silently awaited my next move. I walked to the glass coffee table, pulled a contract drafted by my company's legal department from my briefcase, and slapped it down. The sound echoed in the quiet room, marking the beginning of a heartless agreement. I took off my suit jacket, slung it over a chair, and loosened my tie. Leaning over the table with both hands, I stared down at the small woman before me and enunciated each word with my deepest, most authoritative tone, ensuring she would carve them into her memory. This is our marriage contract. You and I will not interfere in each other's private lives. You are not allowed to publicly identify yourself as my wife or appear at company events without my direct order. In this house, we have separate rooms and separate lives. Exactly 1 year from today, we will go to court and sign the divorce papers. Your compensation for your time will be a one-time payment of $250,000. Read the terms carefully, then sign the last page. Finished, I stepped back, crossed my arms, and smirked, waiting for her reaction. According to the usual script I'd witnessed in the business world, a country girl sold by her family to pay off a debt, when faced with such a harsh reality and cruel treatment, would start to cower. She would cry, complain about her fate, or at the very least, tremble in fear before the man who held her family's survival in his hands. I had prepared my sharpest, most scathing retorts to shut down any pleas or theatrics she might dare to display. But then, the first surprise occurred. Evelyn didn't cry. Her slender shoulders didn't tremble. She didn't wring her hands in anxiety. The eyes hidden behind those thick lenses were as still as a windless lake. She bent down and calmly picked up the contract. I thought she would have to sound out each word, taking an hour to get through it with her limited education. But no, her eyes scanned the pages with incredible speed. She only paused for a few seconds on the key clauses regarding the contract's duration, responsibilities, business confidentiality, and the compensation amount. Then, Evelyn calmly picked up the fountain pen I had placed on the table and signed her name with a single, decisive stroke at the bottom of the page. There were no superfluous complaints, no choked sobs, no mournful sighs. After signing, she pushed the contract back toward me with both hands and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "It's done. If there's nothing else, I'd like to go to bed. It's getting late." Her composure, so decisive it was almost cold, made me pause. I felt a strange sense of deflation, a peculiar thought flickering in my mind. This woman seemed nothing like the naive person described in her resume. The way she signed the contract was reminiscent of seasoned business partners closing a major deal. But the arrogance of a successful man quickly dismissed that absurd notion. I convinced myself she was just putting on a brave face to preserve her last shred of dignity. Or perhaps she was just so eager for the $250,000 settlement that she quickly and obediently sealed the deal. I gathered the papers, put them back in my briefcase, and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me, leaving my new wife alone on her first night. The next morning, the atmosphere at the breakfast table was as tense as a drawn bowstring. My mother sat in her usual seat at this, her face set like stone, her eyes radiating anger and annoyance. My unilateral decision to cast Victoria aside for a girl from an inferior background had ruined her entire strategic alliance plan. She felt utterly humiliated in front of her friends in high society, who always used their children's marriages as a measure of a family's success. Next to my mother sat Violet, my younger sister. Spoiled since childhood, she had a superiority complex and a deep contempt for anyone from a lower social class. When Evelyn came down the stairs, her simple, almost rustic appearance immediately became the target of their cruel ridicule. Evelyn was wearing a worn white blouse and ill-fitting black trousers that did nothing for her figure, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Violet sneered, deliberately speaking loudly to the maid standing by the table. "Since when do we let the help eat at the main table? Look at that getup and those glasses. If we introduced her as the daughter-in-law of this house, people would laugh their heads off." I have no idea what kind of spell she cast on Carter to make him bring this disaster home. My mother immediately chimed in. She slammed her hot teacup onto its saucer, creating a sharp clatter. Her voice, shrill and piercing, lashed out. "This family has standards, education, and social standing. Anyone who marries into this family must, at the very least, know their place. Don't think that just because you tricked Carter into marriage, you've become some queen living in the lap of luxury. A country bumpkin with no education, from a family drowning in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy, being allowed to step through this door is a blessing you don't deserve. You'd best learn to live quietly, do the housework properly, and not be an eyesore every time I have to look at you." I sat at the other end of the table, sipping my black coffee, slowly turning the pages of the morning's financial paper. I had no intention of intervening. On the contrary, I lingered to see how my shield would handle her first storm. I was certain that, faced with such a direct, vicious, and personal attack from the two most powerful women in the house, this country girl would either bow her head and cry for forgiveness, or grit her teeth and endure the humiliation in silence. An uneducated person would easily lose control of their emotions. But once again, Evelyn made me put down my newspaper. She didn't panic, get flustered, or show any resentment. She walked to the dining table, calmly pulled out an empty chair, and sat down. She gracefully lifted the porcelain teapot, poured a cup of hot tea, and placed it carefully before my mother with both hands, an act of perfect, respectful etiquette. Only then did she look up. Her voice was gentle and polite, but every word was articulate, clear, and carried the weight of 1,000 pounds, shattering all their mockery. "Mother, Violet," Evelyn began, looking directly at my mother, without a hint of fear or avoidance. "I know my presence here is not pleasing to you, but this marriage, from the very beginning, was a straightforward business transaction. My family's company needed capital to survive a financial crisis, and Carter needed a suitable person to fulfill his own business objectives at the corporation. I am here not to climb the social ladder or to take advantage of this family's wealth, but to fulfill my obligations in a bilateral agreement. It was a mutually beneficial deal. No one owes anyone anything. Carter's family's money saved my father, and in return, I will properly fulfill my role as a wife on paper, without affecting the family's reputation. So please, rest assured. I know my place and have no illusions about things that do not belong to me. After 1 year, I will leave on my own accord." Her rebuttal was incredibly tight, coherent, logical, and reasonable. Her demeanor was dignified, not arrogant or defiant, but certainly not subservient or pathetic. My mother's mouth fell open, speechless. She couldn't utter another insult because Evelyn's reasoning was too sharp, striking at the very core of this contractual marriage. Violet stared, her face flushed with anger, but she couldn't find a single loophole in that statement to argue against or mock further. I sat in silence, my coffee cup frozen in mid-air, my eyes fixed on the delicate face hidden behind those thick glasses. For the first time, I vaguely recognized a clear truth. This woman was not as foolish or weak as her resume suggested. The ability to respond with such calm logic, to dismantle an attack by grasping the core issue amidst such hostility, this was absolutely not something an uneducated person could do. The incident at the breakfast table only made my mother resent Evelyn more. Accustomed to being in control, she was now being silenced by a daughter-in-law from a lower class with sharp logic, and her anger intensified. That afternoon, as soon as I got home from work, she summoned me to the library on the 3rd floor. With extreme firmness, my mother demanded that I deal with this defiant daughter-in-law. She would not tolerate someone as calm and inscrutable as Evelyn living in her house without being tightly controlled. My mother pressured me, demanding that I bring Evelyn to work at the company immediately. Her true intention wasn't to provide a job or help her daughter-in-law, but to bring Evelyn into her sphere of influence. She planned to use her network of loyal staff at the company to monitor Evelyn's every move, to prevent her from stealing important commercial information or attempting a takeover of Horizon Corp from within. I stood with my arms crossed, leaning against a bookshelf, listening to my mother's paranoid analysis. I understood her intentions perfectly, but I had my own calculations. Evelyn's calm and sharp reasoning that morning had inadvertently bruised my massive ego. I was a CEO who liked to have everything under my control. I hated unpredictable variables. A pawn that was starting to show unexpected signs of intelligence and resilience was a dangerous thing for my plan. To put Evelyn in her place, to completely crush any illusions she might have about being a powerful wife, I decided to go along with my mother's idea, but in my own cruel and thorough way. I would push her to the very bottom of the corporate hierarchy, so she would understand just how insignificant her position truly was. The next morning, I told Evelyn to change into business attire and get in the car with me to go to the Horizon Corp headquarters. During the 30-minute drive, we didn't exchange a single word. The air in the car was suffocatingly tense. When the car stopped in front of the grand entrance of the towering glass skyscraper, I got out and had Evelyn follow me through security. I bypassed the HR department and took her directly to the administrative office on the 3rd floor. I called over the department head, a man named Mark, and assigned her a job right in front of dozens of busy employees. My voice was cold, laced with the authority of an owner, and devoid of any warmth or consideration. This is a new employee, Mark. Assign her to the facilities support team. Her main duties will be cleaning and general errands. She'll be responsible for cleaning the floors, wiping down tables in the conference rooms, making coffee, serving water to staff, photocopying large documents, and running documents between buildings. There's absolutely no need for any special treatment. Just apply the company's strictest labor regulations. If she makes a mistake, write her up and deduct her pay according to policy. Mark stood frozen to the spot, his mouth agape, unable to believe what he was hearing. He was aware of who Evelyn was through rumors that had leaked from the executive board. He never imagined the boss would be so ruthless as to throw his own legal wife into the lowest, most grueling position in the company. Whispers and curious murmurs began to ripple through the surrounding employees. They pointed at Evelyn's cheap clothes, her plain appearance, and her thick glasses. Their eyes were filled with undisguised contempt and bitter sarcasm. I stood with my arms crossed, closely observing Evelyn's expression. I wanted to wear down her spirit. I wanted her to be so ashamed that she would burst into tears and run away, or lash out and demand fair treatment, giving me an excuse to humiliate her further in public. Even the strongest woman would find it hard to endure such public degradation from her own husband in front of so many strangers. But once again, Evelyn completely shattered my cruel expectations. She showed no sign of being hurt or humiliated. She just calmly adjusted her glasses, bowed her head to Mark in a thoroughly professional manner, and then turned to me. Her voice was as neutral as a stranger speaking to a superior, without a hint of resentment. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the job opportunity. I will do my best to complete all assigned tasks, sir. With that, she turned and followed the HR guide to receive her light blue facilities support uniform. Her posture was straight, her body thin, but her steps were incredibly firm and decisive. Not a single frown of displeasure, not a trace of resentment or shame was visible. Watching her small figure disappear around the corner of the hallway, a surge of indescribable frustration rose within me. In this cat-and-mouse game, I was supposed to be the one in control, the one feeling gratified. But why was it that every time I confronted her, I felt like I was the one being seen through and looked down upon? At Horizon Corp, the administrative department was always a hotbed of office politics and rivalry. Jessica, my powerful executive assistant, held sway over many internal affairs. Jessica was sharp, attractive, efficient, and had an outstanding ability to manage schedules. Because of these qualities, I kept her by my side as an effective tool for handling surface-level administrative tasks. But her competence was matched by an undisguised ambition to climb the corporate ladder. Jessica secretly coveted the position of the CEO's wife and constantly tried to win my favor with gestures of kindness that went beyond her professional duties. She viewed any woman who came near my office as a threat. When she learned that I had brought in a new employee for a menial job in her department, she immediately took notice and showed hostility from day one. Since my wedding was completely private, Jessica had no idea that Evelyn was my legal wife. She had only heard whispers from the finance department that this woman was the daughter of a bankrupt debtor, granted a lowly job by the CEO out of pity to work off her family's debt. With her naturally jealous and petty nature, Jessica immediately used her full authority as an executive assistant to bully the new employee mercilessly. From my glass-walled office on a higher floor, I had a panoramic view of the open-plan administrative area below. I frequently witnessed Jessica striding around, pointing and ordering Evelyn to do tasks that were not in her job description. One moment, she would force Evelyn to carry dozens of heavy water cooler jugs from the ground floor to the fifth-floor conference room while the service elevator was under maintenance. The next, she would arrogantly demand that Evelyn clean out a dusty archive room, untouched for decades, in a single morning. Some days, right before the lunch break when everyone else had left, Jessica would dump messy stacks of paper on Evelyn's desk, ordering her to sort them, and then walk to neighboring buildings to deliver documents under the scorching sun. All of these acts of harassment happened openly, in front of many people. The other office workers, prone to conformity and fearful of authority, saw the CEO's assistant disliking the newcomer and joined in the ostracism to curry favor with Jessica. No one invited Evelyn to lunch. No one offered to help with the heavy tasks. They treated her like an invisible, errand-running machine, constantly calling her name to make coffee, empty trash cans, or clean up their personal food spills. I sat in my office, sipping coffee, fully aware of the terrible things happening below. A single phone call from me, and Jessica would stop immediately, and the staff would be forced to change their attitude. But I turned a blind eye, determined to treat this cruel bullying as a psychological test, a way to train my sham wife in subservience. I wanted to see where her breaking point was. I waited for the day she would collapse completely, knock on my door in tears to beg for help, or angrily throw off her uniform and quit. However, Evelyn's patience and resilience were far greater than I had imagined. She never once complained, never shed a tear, and never showed any signs of exhaustion. When given menial tasks, she completed them silently and with remarkable efficiency. When assigned heavy labor, she diligently worked alone, organizing her tasks logically to conserve energy. Her uniform was always soaked with sweat, her glasses occasionally slipping down her nose from the exertion, but her eyes remained unnaturally calm, without a flicker of resentment. Evelyn completed every task perfectly, with a cleanliness and orderliness that even the strict department head, Mark, couldn't find a single fault to write her up for. Her composure in the face of all this malice made me even more restless. A strange, contradictory feeling began to grow in my mind, a mix of my cruel desire to crush her spirit and a burgeoning, quiet respect for this small woman. Horizon Corp was entering a critical phase in preparation for the final approval of our new high-tech industrial park project. The immense workload fell on all departments, forcing the entire company to work overtime regularly, the office lights blazing late into the night. That evening, I finished a strategic meeting with the branch managers when the clock struck 10:30 p.m. I loosened my tie, grabbed my briefcase, and left my office, heading down the corridor to the parking garage. As I passed the open-plan administrative area, I noticed that all the overhead lights were off, except for a single desk lamp glowing from a corner near the archives. I slowed my pace, curiously approaching the glass door. Through the slightly ajar opening, I saw Evelyn hunched over under the yellow light. On her desk was a thick stack of printed financial reports, a risk assessment for the new industrial park project, delivered by the printing department late that afternoon. I stopped, frowning as I recalled a snippet of conversation I'd overheard from Mark earlier. Jessica had been assigned the task of proofreading this draft for typos and formatting errors before I reviewed the content for final printing. But, true to her lazy and entitled nature, and with the aim of tormenting the new employee, Jessica had dumped the entire stack of documents filled with complex economic terminology and intricate charts onto Evelyn's desk. Using a personal matter as an excuse, she ordered Evelyn to stay late and manually proofread every single line on the paper copy. Jessica had even threatened that if I found a single typo or formatting mistake the next day, Evelyn would be held fully responsible and have her month's salary deducted. Forcing a facilities support worker to proofread a high-level, specialized macroeconomic financial document was a blatant act of sabotage designed to publicly humiliate her. How could someone with a poor education have the patience or knowledge to find errors in dense financial data? Her colleagues had simply watched that afternoon, whispering about her background and bad luck. Not a single person dared to help or speak up for her, afraid of offending the executive assistant. They had left her to struggle with the mountain of paper and rushed off home. And now, in the silent emptiness of the building, Evelyn sat alone, working quietly. Her slender hand held a red pen, carefully gliding across each printed page. Her reading speed was astonishingly fast. Occasionally, she would lift a page, holding it closer to the light to scrutinize the columns in a depreciation cost table, then decisively lower her pen to circle a problematic area. That image of her lonely, patient, and diligent etched itself into my mind. Looking at her small silhouette cast against the white wall, an unfamiliar pang of guilt stirred within me. I began to wonder if the cruel games I was allowing Jessica to play were too much for a woman who had done me no wrong. After all, she was still my wife on paper. I even considered pushing the door open, telling her to stop, to forget about that meaningless pile of documents, and that I would drive her home. But just as my hand touched the cold doorknob, my arrogant pride and deep-seated suspicion pulled me back. I dismissed the fleeting, foolish pity, withdrew my hand, and silently walked to the elevator. She needed to experience hardship to know her place, I told myself. I had no reason to pity a shield I had bought with money. The next morning, when I walked into my office, the stack of project reports was placed neatly on Jessica's desk before she had even arrived. The document was carefully paginated. Minor spelling or margin errors were marked with small yellow sticky notes so the drafting department could easily find and correct them in the soft copy. Jessica looked visibly annoyed at not finding an excuse to reprimand or discipline Evelyn, who had completed the proofreading of the hard copy meticulously and on time. That afternoon, I had Jessica's team bring the marked-up hard copy directly to me for content approval. This was a core document, containing a series of crucial market analysis indicators for the upcoming presentation to a foreign delegation. I sat in my office with the door closed, focusing with utmost care as I read through each page. I skimmed past the pages with sticky notes for simple typos, concentrating on the economic data tables. When I flipped to the 8th appendix, the section calculating discounted cash flow and the internal rate of return, I froze. A very serious data error, caused by a formula mistake in the original file created by the analysis department, had resulted in a multi-billion-dollar discrepancy in the asset depreciation forecast. The error was subtle, buried deep within complex spreadsheets, and would have been easily overlooked by anyone other than a seasoned expert like me, who had been reading such reports daily for 10 years. But what stunned me was not the carelessness of the finance department. It was that someone had already discovered this error and corrected it directly on the printed paper with a red pen. Right next to the incorrect figure, a circle was drawn in bold red ink. An arrow pointed to the margin, where a completely new formula was handwritten. The recalculated result was incredibly precise, down to the last decimal point. More remarkably, The writer had added a few concise comments using precise micro and macroeconomic terms, pointing out a flaw in the project's exchange rate risk assessment if the incorrect data was used. Since the proofreader did not have computer access to edit the source file, they had been forced to use a red pen to make a note directly on the hard copy as a warning. The fact that Jessica had submitted this draft with handwritten red ink on it proved she hadn't read the content carefully at all, only giving it a cursory glance. The handwriting in red ink was elegant, decisive, and had the distinct style of someone who worked in a high-intensity intellectual environment. The analytical thinking demonstrated in those few lines was so sharp that even my veteran CFO might not have spotted it so quickly. I frowned, turning the page over and over under my desk lamp. Who had corrected this report? No one in my current finance team possessed this level of sharp analytical thinking or this concise way of presenting a problem. I buzzed for Mark, the HR manager, and ordered him to pull the security camera footage from the printing area and the administrative section from the previous night to see who had touched my document. But unfortunately, the camera system for that floor was down for scheduled maintenance, so no footage was saved. Holding the paper with the red handwriting, I had a strong feeling that there was an exceptional hidden talent within my company. Some anonymous person was quietly observing and correcting the fatal mistakes of the system. The security of this project's information was paramount, and I had to find this person at all costs before the official negotiations began. Later that day, I decided to find the answer to the red pen mystery myself. I called Jessica into my private office to question her directly about the report. When she entered, I deliberately kept my expression relaxed and gestured for her to sit in the leather chair opposite my desk. I tossed the document onto the table, opened to the page with the red ink, and asked in a falsely complimentary tone to set a trap. The team did a great job on this report, Jessica, especially the correction to the cash flow figures on page 8. If this error had gone to the board, it would have seriously damaged the project's credibility. Who on your team spotted this and made such an excellent note? If it was one of your subordinates, I'll promote them to lead analyst immediately and give them a handsome bonus. Jessica glanced at the page, her eyes betraying a flicker of confusion and calculation. Her job was purely administrative. She had no in-depth knowledge of finance or macroeconomic terminology. However, her greed for recognition and her habit of taking credit for others' work overrode her common sense. When she submitted the document to me, she had no idea what the red circle meant, assuming it was just a regular typo. Now, hearing my praise, she quickly beamed, puffing out her chest to shamelessly claim the achievement. That was me, sir. This morning, while reviewing the paper copy before submitting it to you, I noticed the figures seemed unusual, so I recalculated them myself and made a note for your convenience. I gave a cold smile, my eyes instantly hardening into the stern gaze of an interrogator. I leaned forward, pointed directly at the red text, and drilled her with a series of extremely technical questions. Is that so? Then please explain to me why you used the adjusted gross profit margin method combined with currency depreciation to offset inflation risk here? Why not use the standard capital asset pricing model? And the beta coefficient you used here, what data source did you pull from to apply to this complex formula? The barrage of highly specialized questions left Jessica speechless. The color drained from her face, the smile vanishing from her lips. She stammered, her voice trembling, as beads of sweat formed on her forehead. Her hands were clenched together, twisting nervously. Well, sir? I was in a hurry at the time, so I just vaguely remembered the formula and applied it. Let me go back and review my notes, and I'll submit a detailed report to you later. I slammed my hand on the desk, shouting so loudly she flinched. Stop with the pathetic lies. I know exactly what your capabilities are. You would never have the knowledge to write this kind of macroeconomic analysis. Don't waste any more of my time. Get out and bring the entire document compilation team in here. Now. Jessica scrambled to her feet and scurried out of the room, not daring to utter another word. I sank back into my chair, my mind racing, connecting the disparate pieces of information. It wasn't Jessica. The finance team had submitted the printout yesterday afternoon. Only those who had access to the hard copy in the administrative area last night could have touched it. This morning, the document had been placed on Jessica's desk by Evelyn herself after she had finished proofreading it. The image of Evelyn, sitting diligently under the yellow lamplight, poring over every line, scrutinizing every table with a red pen in her hand, flashed through my mind. I opened my computer and pulled up the fake resume I had on file for her. Could it be? Could the person who corrected the report with such profound knowledge be my uneducated, country bumpkin of a contract wife? A deep suspicion began to take root in my mind, forcing me to observe Evelyn through a completely different lens, one of caution and vigilance. Horizon Corp was on the verge of a historic opportunity, but it was also a decisive, life-or-death challenge. The large-scale, high-tech industrial park project, into which we had poured all our resources for the past 2 years, was finally entering the capital negotiation stage. This time, our partner wasn't a single domestic company, but a consortium of major investment funds from several countries, including France, Germany, Italy, Russia, and the Arab bloc. The total projected investment was in the tens of billions of dollars. If this deal succeeded, Horizon would ascend to a position of absolute dominance in the national industrial real estate sector, completely crushing our rival, Prosperity Holdings. Conversely, if the negotiations failed, the massive bank loan we took out for land acquisition would sink the entire corporation within the next 5 years, and I would be held fully responsible. I worked relentlessly day and night, sometimes staying in my office until 3 a.m. to review every clause of the English language contract. The pressure from the board of directors weighed heavily on my shoulders. The old guard shareholders, already displeased with my rejection of the marriage alliance with Prosperity, were now scrutinizing me more intensely than ever. They had stated bluntly in last week's meeting that this project was my last chance to prove my executive capabilities. Any mistake in the reception or negotiation process, and I would have to voluntarily resign as CEO. To prepare for this critically important foreign delegation, every single detail, no matter how small, had to be perfect. Jessica, as the executive assistant of the administrative department, was entrusted with a vital task: to hire and manage a team of multilingual interpreters. The delegation consisted of billionaires and tycoons accustomed to conducting serious business in their native languages. To ensure absolute accuracy in financial and legal terminology, I had given Jessica an unlimited budget, demanding that she engage the nation's top language service providers. I needed to ensure that for each language, we had an expert simultaneous interpreter of the highest caliber to support the meetings. Jessica accepted the task with supreme confidence, puffing out her chest and assuring me that everything would proceed smoothly. But in reality, she was always looking for ways to assert her authority and use her petty cunning to skim from the budget. Instead of contracting a reputable agency, Jessica unilaterally chose a newly established event staffing company recommended by an acquaintance to get a cut of the commission. She foolishly believed that a few people who could speak the languages for basic conversation would suffice, completely underestimating the importance of specialized translation in a multi-billion-dollar negotiation with complex legal implications. While the entire company was in a frenzy preparing for the momentous event, Evelyn quietly continued her menial tasks. A few times, while inspecting the VIP conference room on the top floor to check on the preparations, I happened to see her carefully wiping down each microphone and arranging the nameplates and chairs for the attendees. What caught my attention was how she positioned the chairs. She wasn't just tidying up randomly, she was adhering strictly to international diplomatic protocols. She had clearly separated the seating areas for the European and Middle Eastern delegations to avoid any potential cultural conflicts during discussions. An ordinary administrative employee would never pay attention to such macro-level details. However, the immense pressure and concerns of the massive project quickly made me dismiss my budding suspicion. I told myself it was probably just luck, or that Mark, the HR manager, had given her specific instructions. I turned and walked away, leaving my contract wife to her lowly cleaning tasks, completely unaware that she was the only life raft that could save me from the impending storm. The fateful morning for Horizon Corp began with an atmosphere so tense it was suffocating. Dozens of security guards in black suits stood watch at every entrance to the building. The entire main lobby was laid with a luxurious red carpet, and fresh flowers adorned the path leading to the private VIP elevator. The executive board, department heads, and representatives from the board of directors were all present from early on. Everyone was impeccably dressed, their faces taut with anticipation, waiting for the moment the investment delegation would arrive. The clock struck 7:30 a.m., just 30 minutes before the fleet of luxury cars carrying the tycoons was scheduled to pull up. I stood in the middle of the grand lobby, adjusting my tie, doing a final review of the reception plan with my team. Just then, Jessica came running in from the parking lot, her face deathly pale. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the sheer panic in her eyes. Tripping in her high heels, she nearly tumbled in front of me and the other executives. I frowned in annoyance, and before I could ask what was wrong, Jessica delivered the devastating news. "Sir, the staffing agency just called with an emergency. The entire 5-person translation team we hired had to be rushed to the hospital this morning. They all got severe food poisoning after eating at a seafood restaurant I booked for them last night. All 5 are on IV drips and in no condition to come to work." The news hit me like a physical blow, shattering months of meticulous preparation by our entire team. I was furious, my hands clenched into fists. I yelled at Jessica right in front of her subordinates. "What are you talking about? This event determines the survival of the entire corporation, and this is how you manage personnel? I told you to hire the most reputable agency, to sign a proper contract. Do you have any idea what we're facing today without specialized interpreters? A multi-million-dollar breach of contract penalty and the risk of bankruptcy are hanging over all of our heads." Jessica trembled, sobbing, her hands covering her face as she tried to defend herself with weak, irresponsible excuses. "Sir, I am so sorry. I never thought it would turn out this badly. I've been calling every language center in the city, big and small, but no one can provide interpreters for 5 specialized languages at such short notice. They all require at least a week's advance booking. Please, sir, give me a little more time to fix this." I brushed aside her useless pleas. "Time isn't going to wait for us to fix your mistake. The delegation doesn't have time to listen to our pathetic excuses. There is no room for incompetence or justification here. If this contract isn't signed today, you can pack your things and get ready to face a lawsuit for damages." With that, I turned and walked quickly towards the large glass doors. The fleet of black luxury cars with diplomatic flags had already begun to pull into the company's driveway, guided by security. There was no other choice. I had to put on a mask of calm and greet our guests. My mind was completely blank. All my carefully laid plans and perfect negotiation strategies were about to crumble into dust because of the negligence and cheap greed of one assistant. I knew I was only fluent in English, while these partners were notoriously conservative and demanded absolute professionalism in their native tongues. The car doors opened. I stepped forward to shake each person's hand, forcing a smile as I led them to the elevator, feeling as though I were walking to my own execution. The air inside the main boardroom was suffocating. The massive, oval-shaped oak table was filled with some of the most powerful faces in the business world. On one side sat the leadership of Horizon Corp, major shareholders representing various factions, and my mother, present to witness her son's historic moment. On the other side was the foreign investment delegation, exuding an aura of authority, their sharp eyes like those of old wolves on the international stage. Everyone was seated. The project documents had been distributed. Only one crucial element was missing: the interpreters. Mr. Dubois, the representative of a colossal French investment fund, was the first to show his irritation. He had a reputation in the financial world as an extremely principled, short-tempered businessman who never tolerated tardiness or unprofessionalism. Dubois kept glancing at his gold wristwatch, his annoyed gaze sweeping over the empty row of chairs reserved for the translation team behind us. He turned to speak with his German colleague, Mr. Mueller, and the Arab representative, Mr. Al-Fayed, with disapproving frowns. Dissatisfaction began to spread across the table like an oil slick. I stood at the podium, trying my best to remain calm, using all of my fluency in English to welcome them and clumsily cover up our disgraceful mishap. I explained that due to an unforeseen technical issue with our personnel, the interpretation team had been delayed. I asked for their understanding, and proposed we proceed with the general project overview in English for the time being. But as soon as I finished, Mr. Dubois slammed his hand down on the oak table, the sharp sound echoing through the large room. He shot to his feet, protesting loudly in a rapid, harsh torrent of French. While I couldn't understand it all, his furious tone and emphatic gestures made it clear that this problem couldn't be smoothed over with a simple apology. His French-speaking assistant immediately stood and translated in a frigid tone. Mr. Dubois says that Horizon Corp is showing a grave lack of respect for its partners. The prior Memorandum of Understanding clearly stated that the negotiation languages must include French, German, and Arabic to ensure transparency for the complex legal terms. Forcing the investors to listen to a presentation in broken English is an insult to their status and professionalism. If Horizon cannot even manage a basic preparatory step like this, they have no reason to trust us with billions of their dollars. As the translation ended, both Mr. Mueller and Mr. Al-Fayed nodded in agreement. They decisively closed their document folders, leaning back in their chairs with an air of refusal to continue. One of them even signaled to his personal secretary to start packing up. On our side, the board members began to panic. My mother was sweating, her face ashen. She shot me a look filled with blame and fury. Whispers of blame started to ripple through our ranks. Everything was collapsing right before my eyes. Tens of millions in deposits. 2 years of sleepless nights all about to evaporate. I stood frozen at the podium, my knuckles white from gripping the sides. I was completely trapped, with no way to salvage this desperate situation. My tenure as CEO was over. At that very moment of utter despair, just as Mr. Dubois picked up his leather briefcase to leave, the heavy oak doors creaked open. Every irritated eye in the room shot towards the sound, clinging to a desperate hope. But it wasn't the translation team. It was Evelyn. She was pushing a stainless steel utility cart, carrying pristine white porcelain tea sets and a steaming pot of hot tea. She was still wearing her slightly worn light blue facilities support uniform, her hair in its usual neat ponytail, the familiar thick-rimmed glasses on her nose. Seeing my wife appear in such a lowly state at this life-or-death negotiation only deepened my frustration. I thought she had no sense of occasion, barging in at this critical moment, making us a laughingstock and further humiliating the company. I was about to signal for Mark, the HR manager, to get her out of there before she made things worse. But Evelyn completely ignored my dismissive gesture. She calmly pushed the cart towards the negotiation table with incredible professionalism. Just as Mr. Dubois was loudly complaining in French again about the delay, Evelyn gently placed a cup of hot tea in front of him with both hands. And then, to the absolute astonishment of every single person in the room, she spoke. A stream of French flowed from her lips, the pronunciation perfect, the intonation elegant, fluid, and as polished as a native Parisian diplomat's. The room fell utterly silent. All whispers ceased instantly. Mr. Dubois stopped mid-sentence, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the little cleaning lady before him. His own assistant's jaw dropped. Evelyn stood straight, her gaze confident as she looked directly at Mr. Dubois and continued to explain the situation in French. She offered the sincerest apologies from Horizon Corp's leadership for the unexpected health issue of the official interpretation team. She then personally guaranteed that this setback would not affect the quality of the negotiations and respectfully requested permission to temporarily assume the role of lead multilingual interpreter to assist him and the other esteemed guests. Dubois' expression shifted from anger to amazement, and then from amazement to intrigued amusement. He immediately put his briefcase back down, crossed his arms, and decided to test her with a very difficult question, laden with technical jargon about land use planning laws and foreign investment cash flow. Without a second of hesitation, Evelyn responded fluently, breaking down the issue with concise and sharp analysis. She used the most complex, specialized terminology that even a top language student would struggle with in such a high-pressure situation. Her erudition, deep understanding, and poised demeanor completely disarmed the notoriously difficult French billionaire. He nodded, a smile of satisfaction spreading across his face as he pulled his chair back to the table. I stood at the podium, feeling as if my long-held arrogance had just been slapped out of me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the contract wife I had once scorned as an uneducated country girl, a cheap pawn. In her simple uniform, she suddenly seemed to radiate a brilliance that overshadowed every high-powered, degree-laden executive in the room. A miracle had just happened, and it had come from the very shield I had intended to trample into the dust. Immediately after Mr. Dubois sat down, Mr. Mueller, the representative from the German investment fund, still looked skeptical. He cleared his throat, opened a document highlighted with dense figures, and posed a challenging question in his native German about the price volatility of raw materials and the project's inflation management capabilities. He spoke at a breakneck pace, deliberately using financial slang common in European circles to trip her up. My mother, sitting nearby, gripped the arms of her chair, her face a mask of extreme anxiety, knowing that German was a formidable language barrier. But Evelyn merely pushed her glasses up her nose, showing no sign of confusion. She calmly took a step towards the center of the table and answered, Miss Muller, directly in a crisp, forceful German, her pronunciation flawless. She didn't just translate the question. She proactively explained, on my behalf, the consumer price index adjustments and the revised operational cost projections. Every number, every argument she presented, flowed with an unstoppable logic. Mr. Muller's skeptical frown transformed into wide-eyed surprise, followed by repeated nods of approval at her deeply insightful analysis. It didn't stop there. When the discussion turned to the internal rate of return and free cash flow, Mr. Al-Fayed, the representative from the Arab bloc, leaned forward and made a strict demand regarding profit-sharing ratios based on the unique business ethics of the Middle East. This time, Evelyn smoothly switched to Arabic. Her voice became more fluid and respectful, yet she firmly held the company's core negotiating position. She used precise terminology from Islamic finance law to clarify the profit-sharing terms, ensuring the partners' interests were protected without compromising Horizon Corp's fundamental benefits. After communicating fluently in French, German, and Arabic, and tying it all together with specialized English, Evelyn calmly walked to stand beside me at the central podium. She reached for the tablet controlling the projector screen and opened the project's source file. She was no longer just an interpreter. She had taken complete command of the presentation. She pointed directly at the cash flow volatility chart, explaining in detail the capital asset pricing model and our strategies for hedging against exchange rate risk. These were the exact complex issues that someone had circled and corrected in red ink on the paper copy just days before. Every word she spoke was high-level macroeconomic knowledge, directly addressing the investor's deepest concerns and offering comprehensive solutions. The vast room seemed to fall silent, filled only with the sound of Evelyn's clear, powerful voice. The seasoned tycoons sitting below were completely captivated by her brilliant presentation. They no longer saw the cheap uniform she was wearing or the thick, plain glasses on her face. In their eyes, the small woman standing next to me was an outstanding financial expert, a great mind solving billion-dollar investment puzzles. I stood beside her, completely overshadowed, a redundant figure at my own podium. My arrogance as a CEO was shattered into a million pieces, replaced by a profound shock, mingled with a surging sense of gratitude and admiration. My wife, the woman I had condemned to the lowest possible position, was shining brilliantly, single-handedly saving my family's entire legacy. I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on the small figure gesturing at the financial diagrams on the screen. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Was this Evelyn? The country girl with a community college degree whom her parents had cast off to settle a $2 million debt? I remembered our wedding night, when I had coldly thrown the contract at her. She had scanned the complex legal clauses in seconds. I remembered how she had dismantled my mother's attacks at the breakfast table with sharp logic. I remembered her silhouette, hunched over the risk assessment report late at night, and the masterful red pen strokes that had pointed out the finance department's fatal error. All the clues had been right in front of me for so long, but my massive ego and short-sighted prejudice had blinded me. I had deluded myself into thinking I was the master of the game, a benefactor manipulating a mindless pawn. But the truth, unfolding right here in this life-or-death negotiation, proved that I was the biggest fool of all. I had personally thrown a priceless gem into the mud, forcing her to scrub toilets, serve coffee, and endure the humiliation of my petty employees. The more I watched her poised demeanor, the way she used sophisticated economic reasoning to counter every challenge from the foreign investors, the more a feeling of shame and profound regret twisted in my gut. I looked past the glass walls of the boardroom to the corridor outside, where our entire leadership team and key staff were gathered, holding their breath. And I saw Jessica. She was at the very front, her hands gripping the glass door frame. Her face was as white as a sheet, her eyes wide with panic and terror. The files in her hand had slipped and scattered across the floor, but she didn't even notice. Jessica was witnessing the lowly facilities worker, the one she had tormented, burdened with impossible tasks, and tried to humiliate now standing in the most powerful position in the room, negotiating as an equal with world-renowned billionaires and controlling the entire fate of the corporation. Jessica's shoulders trembled violently. She knew that after today, all her malicious actions would be exposed, and her career would be over. It wasn't just Jessica. My mother, seated in the VIP section, was in a similar state of shock. She sat rigid in her chair, her mouth hanging open. The contemptuous looks and venomous words she had once directed at her poor daughter-in-law had completely vanished. In their place was utter astonishment as she watched the most demanding foreign guests nod respectfully at Evelyn. The authority of a former chairman's wife, which she had always been so proud of, was now completely eclipsed by the young woman's true talent. I stood there, swallowing hard to ease the dryness in my throat. My cold, calculated moves had utterly failed. The person I had chosen as a useless shield had torn off her disguise, shattered all prejudice, and boldly stepped into the leadership role right before my eyes. The negotiations stretched for 4 tense hours before finally concluding. Evelyn's brilliance had filled every gap in the initial proposal, turning disadvantages into opportunities for a fair deal. When she finished her presentation on inflation risk insurance with a sharp concluding remark in French, Mr. Dubois took the initiative and stood up. Unable to hide his excitement, he began to applaud vigorously, sparking a round of thunderous applause from the entire investment delegation. The oppressive atmosphere in the room completely evaporated, replaced by joy and relief. Mr. Dubois, smiling broadly, looked directly at me and spoke in English for everyone to hear. Mr. Dubois, Thorne, you are a very lucky man. Your project has great potential. But what made us decide to invest today was the excellence of your personnel. This young woman is not just an interpreter, she is a financial genius. The risk mitigation solutions she just outlined have completely convinced our board. We agree to sign the comprehensive investment agreement and will concede an additional 2% in dividends to Horizon Corp as per her suggestion. His declaration was like a shot of adrenaline, reviving everyone in the room. The old guard shareholders jumped to their feet, sighing in relief, their faces beaming. My mother quickly dabbed the sweat from her forehead with a handkerchief, her gaze towards Evelyn now mixed with a new sense of awe. The legal team immediately brought in the prepared leather-bound contracts. Before the signing, Evelyn meticulously reviewed each copy, checking the key clauses in all 3 languages, French, German, and Arabic at lightning speed to ensure there were no discrepancies. The pens of Mr. Dubois, Mr. Mueller, and Mr. Mueller, Alfade glided across the paper, marking the birth of a multi-billion-dollar super project that saved Horizon Corp from the brink of bankruptcy. When it was my turn to sign, my hand trembled slightly. The immense burden I had carried for 2 years was finally lifted. I stood, smiled, and shook hands with each of our new partners, offering my sincere thanks. Mr. Dubois gripped my hand firmly, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Never let a fantastic CFO like her get away." I smiled back, but my heart was a tangled mess of irony. CFO? They had no idea that the brilliant mind who had just secured this billion-dollar deal was currently a menial employee on a pitiful salary, who just this morning had probably been cleaning the office restrooms. I turned, looking for Evelyn. She hadn't lingered to take credit or accept praise. She had quietly retreated to a corner of the room and was now diligently collecting the cold, used teacups, placing them back on the stainless steel cart, ready to return to her humble role. The sight of her, in her simple uniform, calmly cleaning up after performing such a monumental feat, made my heart ache. I decided I couldn't let this farce continue for another second. As soon as the investment delegation had been escorted to the elevators, I turned and strode quickly towards the utility cart. I grabbed Evelyn's wrist, my grip firm enough to stop her but not to cause pain. She flinched slightly, looking up at me through her thick glasses, her expression as placid as ever. "Come with me," I commanded in a low voice, pulling her along the executive hallway. The crowd of employees who had been watching gawked and quickly parted to make way. Their eyes were filled with a mixture of curiosity and awe. I pulled Evelyn right past Jessica, who was frozen against the wall, shrinking as if awaiting her execution. I didn't even glance at my assistant. My only focus was the woman walking obediently beside me. I pushed Evelyn into my private executive office and locked the door behind us, engaging the privacy bolt to ensure we wouldn't be disturbed. The room was so quiet I could hear my own ragged breathing. I released her hand and took 2 steps back, facing her. I stared at her pale face and her rumpled uniform, trying to find a rational explanation for the insanity that had just transpired. My arrogant male pride had been completely stripped away, leaving only intense curiosity and a profound sense of having been deceived. "Who are you, really?" I asked, my voice tight, each word heavy with suppressed emotion. That incredible fluency in multiple languages, that deep macroeconomic knowledge, those sharp negotiation skills, where did they come from? The Thompsons could never have produced someone like you. Why did you pretend to be a naive girl from the countryside, letting me humiliate you and order you around all this time? Tell me the truth. Evelyn stood silently in the middle of the luxurious office. She slowly reached up, removed the thick glasses that had been a permanent fixture on her face, and placed them on my desk. The moment the glasses came off, a pair of brilliant, sharp, and incredibly striking eyes were revealed. The vacant, submissive look was gone, replaced by the gaze of a strong, intelligent woman who understood the world. She stood up straight and gave a small, wry smile laced with deep sarcasm. "Have you forgotten, Carter?" she asked, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "The resume you read was very clear. I grew up in a small town. My education was lackluster. A degree from an obscure community college. I am the collateral your $2 million bought. I am just the uneducated shield you married to keep your CEO seat, the woman who was supposed to obediently scrub toilets just the way you wanted. What other truth could you possibly demand from someone who sold herself to settle a debt?" Every word was a dagger, echoing the exact contemptuous thoughts and cruel words I had thrown at her on our wedding night. Her calm, logical retort choked me. I stood there, speechless, my mouth agape, unable to form a single word of defense. A wave of humiliation and shame washed over me. I realized I had built a trap of my own prejudice, and then walked right into it. I, the great CEO who prided himself on his strategic mind, was nothing but a fool who had been played by a woman from the very beginning. After our confrontation, I let Evelyn leave, then locked myself in my office. For hours, I sat in stunned silence. Finally, I picked up my secure line and called my most trusted assistant, the one who handled corporate intelligence and discreet investigations. Swallowing my pride, I ordered him to dig up everything he could on the Thompson family, sparing no expense. I wanted the unvarnished truth about Evelyn's background, and I wanted a full report on my desk by the next morning. At 8 a.m. the following day, a thick, classified folder lay before me. As I turned the pages, reading intelligence gathered from multiple international sources, my face burned with shame at the shocking truth. The pathetic resume was a sophisticated fabrication, orchestrated by Evelyn's own stepmother. Her motive was vicious. She wanted to control the vast company shares Evelyn's deceased biological mother had left her. To pave the way for her own daughter, Mia, to take over, the stepmother had used the excuse of Evelyn's frail health to send her away to a remote town to live with her grandmother, cutting her off from high society. But the investigation proved the stepmother had gravely underestimated her stepdaughter. Evelyn had never attended a community college. With her superior intellect, she had earned a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. She graduated summa cum laude, became fluent in multiple languages, and built a reputation as a brilliant, independent investment analyst. To avoid her father's and stepmother's parasitic greed, she worked under a pseudonym in the international financial markets, consulting for major hedge funds. The analyst's psychological profile in the report was clear. Evelyn had agreed to the demeaning marriage contract not out of weakness or for the $250,000 settlement. To a financial mind of her caliber, that amount was trivial. Her true motive was far grander and more calculated. Her stepmother was secretly colluding with shady figures in the real estate world to illegally liquidate and seize all of Evelyn's inherited shares. Despite her significant financial resources abroad, Evelyn was hampered by complex domestic legal barriers and her father's entangled network. She needed a powerful ally. My company, Horizon Corp., with its formidable influence and top-tier legal team, was the perfect stepping stone. She had willingly walked into my home, endured the humiliation and menial labor, and faded into the background as an invisible cleaner, all to quietly gather evidence, and wait for the right moment to leverage my power to reclaim what was rightfully hers. She didn't need my money. She needed the sharpest weapon in my arsenal, the full legal and corporate might of Horizon Corp. When I finished the last page of the report, my hands fell limply onto the desk. It was all crystal clear. The woman I had scorned as an uneducated simpleton was, in fact, a diamond that multinational corporations would kill for. She had played the fool, enduring everything, just to wait for the day she could dismantle her own family's cruel conspiracy. I had laughed at her, but in reality, I was the one who had been the fool in her brilliantly executed play. A deep, profound regret consumed me. I was a terrible, short-sighted, and cruel man. At 9 a.m., I convened an emergency meeting with the entire executive team, all department heads, and every employee from the administrative department. The atmosphere was grim. I had Evelyn brought in, but not in her uniform. I had her sit in the empty leather chair to my right, a seat reserved for the COO. I began by throwing the internal investigation file onto the table in front of Jessica. My ambitious assistant had lost all her usual arrogance. She stared at the floor, her hands twisting in her lap, trembling. In a steely voice, I listed her offenses for the entire company to hear: skimming commissions, hiring a substandard agency that led to the food poisoning disaster, and her malicious scheme to humiliate Evelyn with the report. Jessica burst into tears. "Sir, please forgive me. I know I was wrong. I was just trying to save the company money. Please, think of my years of service." I slammed my hand on the table. This corporation has no place for greedy, backstabbing employees. If the deal had collapsed yesterday, would your life have been enough to cover the tens of millions in damages? HR will draft your termination letter immediately. You will hand over all your duties and be out of this building by noon. Furthermore, the legal department will blacklist you within our industry network. Let's see who dares to hire someone with your professional ethics. After dismissing Jessica, I turned my cold gaze upon Mark and the other administrative staff. They shrank back in fear. I reprimanded them for their gossiping, their bullying of a new employee, and their lack of basic human decency. I made every single one of them, from Mark down to the newest hire, walk up to Evelyn and offer a formal public apology. Evelyn accepted their trembling apologies with quiet dignity. Seeing the people who had tormented my wife now bowing their heads in shame, a fierce new purpose ignited within me. I now understood her ultimate goal, and I vowed to use the full power of Horizon Corp to help her achieve it. No one would ever harm her again. That evening, I canceled all my appointments and went home early. I went to the library, opened the safe, and took out the 1-year marriage contract I had so coldly thrown at Evelyn. I walked to her room on the second floor. She was reading a thick economics textbook by the window. She looked up as I entered, her expression as calm as ever. Without a word, I walked over to her, held up the contract, and tore it into pieces. The white scraps fluttered to the floor like snowflakes, marking the end of our cold transaction. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, a rare flicker of surprise in her eyes. I looked directly into them and spoke from the heart. "I am sorry. For my arrogance, my stupidity, and my despicable calculations. I've ruined everything. This contract is meaningless now. You are not a shield or a debt payment. You are my wife. My real, legal wife. I know why you came here, and I will prove my sincerity by using every resource I have to get you justice." The next morning, I began to act. At breakfast, with my mother and Violet present, I pulled out the chair next to me for Evelyn. When my mother started to complain, I cut her off. "Mother, let me make this clear. Yesterday, Evelyn single-handedly negotiated the billion-dollar deal that saved this family from bankruptcy. From this day forward, she is this family's benefactor and the wife I cherish most. Anyone in this house who disrespects her will be asked to leave. I control the finances, and that is not an empty threat." My mother, a woman who revered wealth and status, fell silent. The disdain on her face was replaced by a calculated respect. Violet didn't dare say a word. That afternoon, I took our best corporate lawyers to Mr. Thompson's office. I threw down a portfolio containing all the legal documents of his first wife's assets, along with the evidence of fraud Evelyn had gathered. I gave him an ultimatum: sign over all of Evelyn's rightful shares and assets today, or Horizon Corp would sue them for fraud, call in the $2 million loan, and ensure they faced prison time. Faced with our immense legal power, Mr. Thompson and his wife, their hands shaking too badly to hold a pen steady, signed everything over. A month later, Horizon Corp held a grand anniversary gala at the city's most luxurious five-star hotel. The event drew media, politicians, and all our strategic partners. The city's elite were there in full force, most of them eager to see the country bumpkin who had supposedly ruined my life. I stood at the bottom of our mansion's grand staircase in an elegant black tuxedo. When I heard the soft click of heels, I looked up and my breath caught. Evelyn was descending in a stunning, emerald green silk gown that perfectly complemented her slender figure. Gone was the frumpy uniform and the severe ponytail. The thick glasses were replaced with contacts, revealing intelligent, captivating eyes that radiated the confidence of a true powerhouse. She was breathtakingly beautiful. When our Rolls-Royce pulled up to the hotel, a flash frenzy erupted. I got out, walked around, and proudly offered my hand to Evelyn. The chattering crowd of guests fell silent, stunned by the elegance and poise of the woman on my arm. There was no trace of the rumored country girl. I led her to the main stage. Under the glittering crystal chandeliers, I took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice ringing with pride. "Tonight, I would like to introduce you all to my partner in life. This is Evelyn, my wife. And, given the outstanding expertise she has already demonstrated, it is my honor to announce her appointment as the new Chief Financial Officer of Horizon Corp." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Mr. Dubois and our other international partners rose to their feet, raising their glasses in a toast. In the front row, my mother and sister watched with expressions of complete deference. Our rivals, like the chairman of Prosperity Holdings, looked on with grim faces, realizing their chance to defeat us was gone. I turned to Evelyn. She gave me a radiant, genuine smile. As we held the knife together to cut the towering anniversary cake, I felt the warmth of her hand in mine. I knew the journey to win her heart would be long and challenging. But this marriage, which had begun as a cold calculation, had unexpectedly led me to the greatest victory of my life.